Good afternoon and welcome to New York Law School, or as we like to say, New York's Law School. I'm Anthony Crowell, the Dean and President here, and it is truly an honor to welcome you all to our Shainwald Lecture. We're very proud to offer the lecture this year featuring former U.S. Senator George Mitchell. The Shainwald Lecture is always a wonderful event, and each one has featured a momentous national leader, including U.S. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi just last year, Supreme Court Justices Sandra Day O'Connor and Stephen Breyer, former senators and current cabinet secretaries John Kerry and Chuck Hagel, and the late Senator Ted Kennedy. And that tradition continues today with Senator Mitchell. The lecture series was founded by Sybil Shainwald, an alumna and school trustee here, in honor of her late husband, Sidney, who led an incredibly dynamic life as a highly successful accountant and consumer advocate. The series provides a unique forum for thoughtful and intellectual discussion featuring the most prominent leaders in public and judicial service. Sybil herself is a groundbreaking legal pioneer, a visionary who has made fighting for women's health her unrelenting mission for the last 3 decades. She received her law degree in 1976 from New York Law School as an evening student, launching her legal practice as a second career after a successful career as a consumer advocate, making her accomplishments that much more remarkable. She's litigated on behalf of women over dangerous, defective, but widely used contraceptive and health products, and has transformed class action litigation through getting the statute of limitations extended in New York. Sybil's leadership is inspirational, and especially she is an example to our female students, as she was the first woman to receive the New York Law School's prized President's Medal. In a year when New York Law School celebrated the achievement of women in the law, Sybil's impact has been global, helping women and children from New York to Bangladesh, and she's shown the limitless good a lawyer can do. I think the presence of everyone here today is a testament to the respect and admiration that is so widely felt across legal, government, nonprofit, academic, and media circles for her uniquely impressive career. So indeed, it's a true honor to have Sybil as a treasured member of the New York Law School community and someone that we all can call a friend and advocate. It's my pleasure to welcome Sybil to the podium. Sybil?
Hand from a very kind dean. Greetings to all, and thank you for coming. Thank you, Dean Crowell, especially, for your extremely kind remarks, and welcome to the 9th lecture in honor of my husband, Sidney Shainwald. Nobody would have enjoyed listening more to Senator Mitchell, Judge Weinstein, and Congressman Maloney, all of whom represent Sidney's ideals of social and economic justice, and all of whom are active leaders working to attain those goals. This audience is also filled with people who represent Sidney's values in so many different areas, people who care about the world and who work to make it a better place. He would certainly have enjoyed talking politics with everybody here. Like Sidney, with his philosophical orientation toward Edward Bellamy, I would like to look back for just a moment. In 1927, the book of the month, okay, sorry. You don't know what you just missed. In 1927, the Book of the Month Club's bestseller, Your Money's Worth, was published. The authors hypothesized that the marketplace would respond to the inevitable organization of a powerful federation of consumers, and that if 1 million citizens could be persuaded to invest $1 each year for verified facts about their purchases, wonderful things could be done. Sidney wrote the first thesis on the consumer movement after becoming a subscriber to the Consumer Commodity Club. Who at that time would have envisioned that 80 years later, the American prototype would be replicated throughout the world? One of the links between the vision and the reality was Sidney Shainwald. Thank you. I want to now introduce my Congresswoman. Where is she? All right, good. The best, Congressman Carolyn Maloney. Carolyn Maloney is a national leader with an extensive record of accomplishments on financial services, national security, the economy, and women's issues. And you all better vote for the ERA. And she's received great praise for her work from the press. A tenacious, resilient legislator cheered Time magazine. A tiger in the House on every dollar due New York, the Village Voice said about the Congresswoman's efforts to get $60 billion promised after $60 billion promised after 9/11. The New York Times boasted, New York's congressional delegation stands out for their moxie, kind of the way New Yorkers themselves often do. Among the brashest members is Representative Carolyn B. Maloney, a Democrat of Manhattan. Congresswoman Maloney is one of the country's most prolific legislators. With dedication and vision, she has authored and passed more than 70 measures, either as a standalone bill or as language incorporated into larger bills. Among her most significant legislation accomplishments are the credit card. I don't know the full name, Carolyn, but it was the Credit Card Act, right? Okay. Which saves consumers at least $10 billion a year. I can never pronounce, the Broda, yes, 9/11 Health and Compensation Act has now been made permanent thanks to legislation passed last December. And the Debbie Smith Act, called the strongest anti-rape legislation Congress has ever passed. A senior member, Maloney is the senior Democrat on the Joint Economic Committee, a senior member of the Finance Services Committee. She is also a member of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, where she has, of course, defended Planned Parenthood. Do you remember when they asked where are all the women? Carolyn asked that question when all these men were deciding our fate. Maloney also passed legislation that will lead to the creation of a National Women's History Museum on the Washington Wall. And that passed, so all she needs is the money, which she will get, because that's who she is. Maloney has delivered roughly $6 billion in federal transportation funding to New York City for the construction of the 2nd Avenue subway and the replacement of the Kosciuszko Bridge and the repair of the L train, all of which run through her district. It is my very great pleasure to introduce Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney.
Thank you so much, Sybil. I love you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sybil. And let me tell you sincerely, the only thing that could be better than having George Mitchell addressing a New York law school today would be is if he were back in Congress, leading the Senate and helping resolve these challenges before the world and before Congress. I thank Sybil so very much for bringing this lecture series, and every lawyer should aspire to be a lawyer like Sybil Shainwald. I have a long introduction on her, but just believe me that more women owe so much to her for her really groundbreaking bills that are really cases that she brought to court on women's health and won awards for them that were beyond anyone's belief, both nationally and internationally. My purpose today, and it is my honor to introduce the legendary Judge Jack Weinstein of the Eastern District of New York. Judge Weinstein is one of the most celebrated judges in the history of the court. Nominated to the court by President Johnson at the recommendation of Senator Robert F. Kennedy, he served as Chief Judge from 1980 to 1988. He assumed senior status in '93 and continues to teach. Judge Weinstein inspires awe for all that he has accomplished. Alan Dershowitz called him, and I quote, "the most important federal judge in the last quarter century," end quote. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg characterized him as the, quote, "indomitable Judge Weinstein," in tribute to his longevity, his determination, and his willingness to take on tough challenges. Most of us just regard him as just plain brilliant. He has amassed a record of presiding over some of the most interesting and difficult cases in history, gaining a reputation as the bench's most daring overseer of mass tort litigation. He is widely regarded as having done more than any other person in America to bring justice to large groups of people. During the 1980s, he combined thousands of unresolved claims against the government by Agent Orange victims into one mega case and brokered an unprecedented $180 million settlement. He also provided over huge class actions involving asbestos and DES. Weinstein has extracted cash awards in cases he grouped together himself. In 1999, he presided over Hamilton versus Accutech, which held gun makers liable for negligence, an incredibly important and significant case. This was the first jury trial that would hold gun manufacturers liable for negligence. It was overturned, regrettably, on appeal, but imagine if that precedent had held. Let me tell you, we have legislation pending before Congress that would accomplish what would have been accomplished if his case had been upheld. When accused of being an activist judge, Judge Weinstein responded, and I quote, "If by activists you mean the judge feels an obligation to improve the law, then make it more effective, I think most judges are activists. The conservative judges on the Supreme Court are very certainly activists," end quote. Judge Weinstein restores one's faith in justice. I am thrilled that he is here today to introduce the remarkable Senator George Mitchell, who is a hero to so many of us. Thank you so much for being with us, Judge Weinstein, and thank you so much for your remarkable record.
Well, dear friends, the program lists the introducer of this great senator as Kenneth Feinberg. I'm not Kenneth Feinberg. I'm Jack Weinstein. But it's a great honor to be here between two heroes of mine, Sidney Shainwald and Senator George Mitchell. Sybil was the attorney who developed the extraordinary substantive and procedural methods of dealing with DES, diethylstilbestrol, which was given to mothers to help them during the pregnancy and destroyed, in many cases, the reproductive organs of their daughters, some of whom are here today. And what she did in settling and trying these cases was extraordinary. But what she did in getting these people into her office in individuals, groups, and into the courthouse to speak to the judges and others was quite extraordinary and has never been duplicated. She handled not only the legal problems, but the psychic and emotional problems of these women, and did it successfully. And she should be celebrated for what she's done and is doing. Now, Senator George J. Mitchell is an example of our greatest lawyers and public servants. In the highest tradition of our legal profession, he has served our country and the world. His latest book is fascinating. I have it here, I think, my copy. The moment I heard about it, I ran out and bought my copy. And here it is, The Negotiator, Reflection on an American Life from Maine to the U.S. Senate, from baseball to Disney, from Northern Ireland to the Middle East. And there's a short chapter here entitled Elizabeth Taylor's Husband. As far as I'm concerned, this short chapter was worth the price alone. Among his many achievements, he is that poor Maine boy. He doesn't claim to be barefoot, but he is a poor Maine boy who came from the literally wrong side of the railroad tracks to be Democratic Majority Leader of the Senate. He worked in a trusting relationship with Republican Senator Bob Dole to make our government work in a way that is a sad contradiction to what goes on in Washington today. He led in passing the laws protecting our air and water. He ended the Northern Ireland War and came very close, I think, to stopping the Arab-Israeli conflict. He was chairman of the Walt Disney Company, changing its course from failure to a roaring economic success. And he, among other things, authored the report on the use of performance-enhancing drugs in baseball, stopping that scandal and allowing baseball to continue as a great American sport. He's led a large private international law firm, and he is a fellow New Yorker. And he was also a United States District Judge for a very short time. He went on to greater things. Remarkably, in the light of what's going on now in Washington with respect to a replacement of a Supreme Court justice, he turned down President Clinton directly to, I was going to say to his face, but it was over the telephone. When Clinton called and said he wanted to appoint the senator to a vacancy in the Supreme Court, he said, I can't do it, not because he wouldn't have been a great justice, but because he felt that he was obligated to devote his attention to trying to pass the Clinton health bill that would have solved so many problems for this nation. Now, he explains in this book his art and skill in negotiation. And I have two quotes, one page 351, mark it down so you can read it later. How do you negotiate? He says it's definitely not a science or math. It's very much an art requiring knowledge, skill, judgment, and, anyone? Humility. Page 357. He advises, learn to listen. That is the most important lesson of my political life. Page 357, read it yourself. I've been trying to learn to listen for 94 years, and I haven't yet gotten the knack. But it's beginning to help me a bit in court. But what he doesn't say in this book, and what is the message that runs through his life and the book, is that George Mitchell is honest, can be trusted, is fully devoted to the job at hand, and is a man of utter integrity. Senator Mitchell, welcome.
Thank you very much, Judge Weinstein, for that really wonderful introduction. Judge Weinstein and I both attended law school in the evening, we called it. We both worked as truck drivers to get through school, and we both became United States District Court judges. And there the comparison ends. Next year, he will celebrate his 50th year as, go ahead and applaud, yeah, as Representative Maloney said, one of the truly greatest judges in all of American judicial history. I can't tell you how honored I am to be introduced by him, especially since my career as a United States District Court judge lasted less than a year. The one thing I can say as a result of his long tenure and my brief tenure is that I was never reversed by any appellate court. But I mean it sincerely when I say I have been an admirer of Judge Weinstein's, something that I think is shared by a vast majority of lawyers in the United States for most of my life, and it's a great honor to be introduced by him here today. I thank Carolyn Maloney for being here. I have the pleasure of not only being a fan of hers, but of a constituent of hers. And I told her as of now she's ahead 1-0 in the election coming up this year. I'm sure she doesn't need it. She's going to do well as she always has. There are many distinguished officials there, other district court judges, former Attorney General Bob Abrams of New York, and I want to thank all of them for coming. Please join in applauding Judge Abrams. Now, I speak often, so I'm introduced often. I've heard myself talk so much that for me the highlight of the program is the introduction. And so I'm feeling very good about that. Always a pleasure to hear people say nice things about you, especially in public, especially when they're as important as is Judge Weinstein. But there's a risk to it, that if you hear this kind of stuff often enough, you may begin to believe it. So I like to start with a story about introductions and how I was brought back down to earth. I spent 5 years working on the peace process in Northern Ireland, and after we got the agreement, I returned to my home in the U.S., and I wrote a book about that experience. When the book was published, I set out on a promotional tour around the country. I received many, many invitations, and I learned in the process that in the United States, there are more Irish American organizations than there are Irish Americans. And almost everyone invited me to come to their group. I couldn't go to all of them, but I went to many, and as I traveled the country speaking to these Irish American groups, they developed among them a competition as to who could give the longest, most fantastic, frequently ridiculous introductions of me. The proper reaction, of course, would have been for me to show some of the humility, which I describe as necessary, but I had an improper reaction. I loved it. I encouraged them. I scolded them when they left something out. And finally, when I got to the last stop on this book tour, Stamford, Connecticut, the Stamford Irish American Society, I was so impressed with myself that I had a hard time squeezing my head through the front door. When I got inside, the first person I encountered was an elderly woman who rushed up to me, vigorously shook my hand, heaped praise upon me for several minutes, describing how great I am and what wonderful things I've done all over the world. And then she concluded by saying, I don't live anywhere near here. I drove all the way across the state of Connecticut just to come here to shake your hand, to tell you what a great man I think you are, and to ask you, please, would you sign my poster? She handed me a poster with a photograph on it and a pen. I looked at it. I said, I'd be very happy to sign your poster. But before I do, I think there's something I should tell you. She said, what is it? I said, I'm not Henry Kissinger. She said, you're not? She said, well, who are you anyway? And when I told her, she said, why, that's just terrible. She said, I drove 3.5 hours to meet a great man named Kissinger, and all I've got is a nobody like you. I said, well, I'm sorry you feel so bad. I wish there's something I could do. And she thought for a moment. She said, well, there is. When I asked what it was, she leaned forward. I leaned forward. Our heads were touching, and she said in a conspiratorial whisper, nobody will ever know the difference. She said, would you mind signing Henry Kissinger's name to my poster? So I did. And it's hanging in a living room in eastern Connecticut, a daily reminder to me not to take too seriously these wonderful introductions that I received. But coming from Judge Weinstein, I'll take it again anytime. Well, thank you all for being here today. It's a real pleasure for me to deliver the Sidney Shainwald Public Interest Lecture. In their lives, Sidney and Sybil Shainwald have worked for and have come to symbolize social justice. The Consumers Union is a memorial to Sidney, who arguably did more to help more people than most, if not all, of the public officials, like me, who have delivered this lecture. And so when Sybil asked me to come this year, I was truly honored. I thank you, Sybil, for the introduction and for all you have done to carry forward the torch of social justice. The world has changed a lot since 1939, when Sidney, at the age of 22, wrote his thesis on consumer product testing. But the principles on which our country was founded have not changed. In 1787, 45 American colonists gathered in Philadelphia in a constitutional convention. Their objectives were independence and self-governance, and they achieved both. The Declaration of Independence was a powerful statement of the right of free people to govern themselves. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution, what we call the Bill of Rights, is to me still the most concise and eloquent statement ever written of the right of the individual to be free from oppression by government. Our ideals distinguished our nation from the very beginning, and they appeal to people all around the world. They still do. Our military power and our economic strength are necessary and important. But we must never forget that the United States of America was a great nation long before it was an economic or military power. Our ideals have been and remain the primary basis of American influence in the world. They're not easily summarized, but surely they include the sovereignty of the people, the primacy of individual liberty, opportunity for every member of society, an independent judiciary, and the rule of law applied equally to all citizens and, crucially, to the government itself. Especially in these dangerous times, it can be difficult to find the proper balance between collective security and individual liberty. That is true both among nations and within nations. But the problem is not unique to our time. There are a few of us here who are old enough to recall the drama, A Man for All Seasons. It was set in 16th century England. In the central scene, the Lord Chancellor, Sir Thomas More, is talking with Roper, the hot-headed suitor of More's daughter. Roper wants a man arrested because he says he is a bad man and he's dangerous. When Sir Thomas declined to act on that vague basis, Roper angrily says, "So now you'd give the devil the benefit of law." More replied, "Yes. What would you do? Cut a great road through the law to get at the devil?" Roper said, "Yes. I'd cut down every law in England to do that." And Sir Thomas responded with a timeless statement of the rule of law. And when the last law was down and the devil turned around on you, where would you hide? This country is planted thick with laws from coast to coast, man's law, not God's. And if you cut them down, do you think you could stand upright in the winds that would then blow? Yes, More ended, I'd give the devil the benefit of the law for my own safety's sake. I repeat those last words, for my own safety's sake. The essence of the rule of law is that it protects all of us, and we need it. In Sidney Shainwald's lifetime, we saw how quickly a civilized, even a cultured society descended into the abyss of lawlessness. A lawlessness which led to the horror of the Holocaust and the deaths of millions of innocent people, and which degraded an entire nation and stained a whole continent. In the final analysis, it is the rule of law which stands in any society against that fateful descent. We are fortunate to be Americans, to be citizens of what, despite our serious imperfections, is to me the most free, the most open, the most just society in human history. I believe in the American dream because I've lived it. Before I entered the Senate, I served briefly as a district court judge. I enjoyed it very much, especially when I presided over what are called naturalization ceremonies. They're citizenship ceremonies, a group of people who'd come from all over the world and who'd gone through the required procedures gathered before me in a federal courtroom in my home state of Maine. And there I administered to them the oath of allegiance to the United States, and by the power vested in me under our Constitution and law, I made them Americans. It was always very emotional for me because my mother was an immigrant, my father the orphan son of immigrants. They had no education. My mother could not read or write. She worked nights in a textile mill for 50 years. My father was a janitor at a local school. But because of their efforts, and more importantly, because of the openness of American society, I was able to get the education they never had and was able to become the majority leader of the United States Senate. After every such ceremony, I made it a point to speak personally with each of the new Americans, individually or in family groups. I asked them how they came, why they came. They spoke of their hopes, their dreams, their fears. And although the answers were as different as their countries of origin, there were common themes, and they were best summarized by a young Asian man who, when I asked why he came, replied in slow and very halting English. I came, he said, because in America, everybody has a chance. Think about the fact that a young man who had been an American for less than 10 minutes, who could barely speak English, was able to sum up the meaning of our country in a single sentence. America is freedom and opportunity. That's made it possible for most of us here today to lead lives of relative ease, largely insulated from the harsh winds of life by our education, our resources, the webs of friendship and influence we've woven over a lifetime. But if the responsibility of citizenship in a free society under the rule of law means anything, surely it means also that we should look beyond the comfortable lives of privilege that we lead to the lives of all members of our society, indeed of other societies, especially those who do not share our liberties, our privileges, and our comforts. In our country and all around the world, societies today are struggling to deal with the effects of three major trends. They are first, the interactive effects of rapid globalization and very rapid technological change. Second, the threat of global warming. And third, population growth, which is increasingly concentrated in the least developed and most vulnerable places on Earth. Together, they create massive change, widespread uncertainty, fear, and anger. Many factors affect population growth, foremost among them the status of women. Where women are independent and empowered, populations stabilize. Where increased only by immigration. Where women are not independent and empowered, growth rates tend to rise, and over the next several decades, they will do so rapidly. Sadly, in the most vulnerable areas, those population pressures greatly intensify the very poor governance and widespread corruption that exists. They go hand in hand, and they serve to deprive people the world over of the effective assistance of government that we in our country take for granted. Consider these facts. Human beings are first estimated to have appeared on Earth approximately 200,000 years ago. And so it took that long, 200,000 years, for the world's population to reach 1 billion. The most recent billion, the seventh, was added in 13 years. Of the 7.5 billion people on Earth today, 1 in 5 is Muslim. That's about 1.5 billion. A half century from now, indeed sooner, there will be almost 10 billion people on Earth, and 1 in 3 will be Muslim. 3.5 billion. To put that into perspective, that was the total population of the world as recently as 1970. Islam is now torn by internal conflicts, some of which overlap and intersect, some of which are even contradictory. Some date from the colonial post-World War I period, others go all the way back to the 7th century and the political competition to succeed the Prophet Muhammad, which led to the division between Sunni and Shia. That division has been marked by alternating periods of violent expansion and remission. It is now very intense and expanding rapidly. Challenges to long-established balances of power in Iraq and Syria, and now, most recently, Yemen, have opened up that divide with catastrophic consequences for the people of those countries. As the flood of immigrants from the region demonstrates, what most people in the Muslim world want is what most people everywhere want: a stable and secure society, a decent job, a home, and especially the chance to get their children off to a good start in life. But as the current conflicts make clear, many will not find that life, either in their homelands or elsewhere. That is an enormous challenge to the entire world. The Industrial Revolution took place roughly in the century between 1760 and 1870. As machines replaced men, there was widespread fear that unemployment would rise to unacceptably high levels. There was, in fact, much misery and exploitation. But the increase in productivity was so dramatic that standards of living rose even as populations grew. That was a turning point in human history because that was the first time in history that those two converged. Today, 250 years after the onset of the Industrial Revolution, we are struggling with the effects of a new revolution, one which future historians will describe as much a turning point in history as was the Industrial Revolution. It is in technology and communication, and all in the context of a dramatic increase in global trade. The increases in productivity experienced in recent decades have produced massive increases in wealth around much of the globe, but increasingly, the benefits are not being felt through the whole society. As a society, we Americans and every other human society have not yet been able to figure out how to replace the millions of middle-class, middle-income jobs that are being lost daily and not replaced. Whether and how we solve this problem will dominate our lives, including our politics, for decades to come. The same can be said of climate change. One of the most disturbing features of our current political season is the extent to which the denial of scientific reality is so widespread in our country. That so many candidates for the highest office in our country deny global warming or oppose efforts to deal with it, or both, in the face of so much scientific evidence, is not just disturbing, it's dangerous. The chairman of the Senate Environment Committee, one of the most important public positions in this country, has said, quote, "Man-made global warming is the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on the American people." But he and those who share that view are wrong. The science to the contrary is clear and is becoming overwhelming. Global warming is a reality which must be acknowledged and dealt with by people everywhere on Earth. The United States is the dominant power in the world and will be for as far into the future as human beings can see. How we respond to these challenges will have effects all over the world. I have confidence in America and in Americans. I believe that science and reason will prevail over ignorance and fear. I believe that we must, we can, and we will devise the policies to deal with these challenges and many others that will arise in coming decades. As we do so, we must bear in mind that the solution to every human problem contains within it the seeds of a new problem. How we find the right answers to these and other challenges is likely to be as halting and as messy as is our democratic process. But in the end, I'm truly optimistic. Recently, Warren Buffett delivered his annual report to the shareholders of his Berkshire Hathaway company. In part, he wrote these words: "Many Americans now believe that their children will not live as well as they themselves do. That view is dead wrong. The babies being born in America today are the luckiest in history. American GDP per capita is now about $56,000. As I mentioned last year, that in real terms is a staggering 6 times the amount that it was in 1930, the year that I was born, a leap far beyond the wildest dreams of my parents or their contemporaries." He went on to say that U.S. citizens are not intrinsically more intelligent today, nor do they work harder than did Americans in 1930. Rather, they work far more efficiently and thereby produce far more. This all-powerful trend is certain to continue. America's economic magic remains alive and well. That's the end of the quote. I, too, am confident, and I believe that we will emerge from the current controversies, as we have in the past, a better and a stronger country. Our goal must be a society which encourages striving, celebrates success, is conducive to innovation, and enables us to benefit from the talent, the energy, and the skill of every American. The 21st century could be, like many in the past, a time of war, of famine, of oppression, of injustice. But it also could be a time when the dominant power uses its great strength carefully and commits its people, its power, and its prestige to a great and noble vision, a world largely at peace with the rule of law, freedom, education, opportunity, and prosperity, extending to more and more people here in our country and throughout the world. That's our challenge. Given the state of the world today, it is an immense challenge. But as Sidney Shainwald did in his lifetime, we must work to make it our destiny. Thank you all very much for having me. Well, Sybil asked me if I'd take a couple of questions. I apologize. I do have to leave because I'm speaking in Maine this evening. I've got to get to LaGuardia, so I will take a couple. I can ask only that you don't give a speech. Yes.
First of all, it's a great honor to have you here, Senator. If I may sort of hypothetical, assume that Hillary Clinton is the Democratic nominee, and you were advising her as to how to handle Donald Trump, assuming he were the nominee in the televised presidential debates. What advice would you give her, and what strategy would you suggest she adopt?
Well, I would first tell her to reject his approach, that the way to respond to opponents is to lower yourself to their level. That's the first point. The second, that's in this debate over torture and killing the families of those who commit acts against us. To me, the answer to that is we are Americans. We have principles and ideals, and we live by our principles and ideals, and we do not maintain them if we reduce ourselves to the level of those with whom we are dealing. We can combat them effectively without using their tactics. That's the first point. The second point I would make is that she has to offer a positive vision of what leaders, great leaders, are able to see into the future with more clarity than are the rest of us, and to be able to anticipate events in the future and to offer solutions to them, not just the past or current problems. And I hope very much that I support Secretary Clinton, that she will be able to do that effectively and persuade Americans that she at least sees the way to the right approach in our country. This is a very big country. We have 320 million people. By 2050, there will be 440 million Americans. There are tremendously diverse views in this country, and one must listen to those with whom we disagree. And one must be prepared to make principled compromise. Our brains are wired in a way that we are wide open to receive information that is consistent with our own beliefs. We receive it well, we retain it well, we use it often. But if someone offers a view or an opinion or a fact that is contrary to our prior beliefs, we have a tiny opening to our brain. We don't receive it, we don't retain it, we don't use it. We have to be able, in a country of this size and diversity, to genuinely listen to those with whom we disagree and find ways to make common ground, even though it will almost always be an imperfect solution. And what I would suggest to her is that you try to find your way to the best solutions that we can achieve to deal with our problems, recognizing that no one individual, no one party, no one platform possesses all knowledge and wisdom. I'll take one more here.
You're an optimist. Tell me about the chances for peace in the Middle East.
You got to invite me back to do the Shainwald lecture next year for me to be able to deal with that issue. I will just, it's impossible to cover in a few minutes of an answer, so I'll just say this. I believe that there will be a solution and an agreement between Israelis and Palestinians because it is so much in the interest of both societies. And I believe that ultimately societies, like individuals, act out of self-interest, although they often take quite a long way to figure out their self-interest. And I believe that to be the case, notwithstanding the understandable pessimism that exists today. I think it's very much in the interest of both. However, let's be very clear about this. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict does not exist in a vacuum. It is part of a region, and there are interactive effects coming in and going out, and you cannot ignore the other factor, the external factors in the region, when proposing and urging and pushing people toward a solution to their issues. And don't think for a moment that resolving that conflict will in and of itself resolve all of the broader issues in the region. There are many hostilities, very poorly understood by Americans. The Persian-Arab hostility is ancient, deep, gone on for centuries, will go on for a very long time. There are internal conflicts within Islam, which I just briefly touched upon. There are internal strains now within Israeli society. There are internal conflicts within Palestinian society. And all of these have to be taken into account when trying to persuade people to take actions that we believe are in their self-interest. In the end, we have to be there, but they have to want it, and they have to do it. And I believe that they will, because it is increasingly becoming clear that it is very much in their mutual self-interest. I would urge everyone here to go back and read a speech that President George W. Bush made in Jerusalem just over a year before he left office, when he assembled at the King David Hotel in Jerusalem a large group of Israelis and Palestinians to push his effort then, which was called the Roadmap for Peace. He made a very, I thought, persuasive statement, eloquent as to why it is in Israel's interest that the Palestinians have a state, and it is in the Palestinians' interest why Israel, the people of Israel, ought to have reasonable and sustainable security. And I think that remains the case despite the many difficulties and the many failures of the past. And I'll close with just this comment. When we reached the agreement in Northern Ireland, I remarked at the time, when I announced the agreement, that it came almost exactly 800 years after the British domination of Ireland, and it was the last in a long series of failed efforts. Peace is such a noble and great objective that the fact it hasn't been attained cannot be a permanent impediment to continuing efforts to achieve it. And the reason the two-state solution remains alive as between Israelis and Palestinians, despite the many failures of the past, is that no credible or feasible alternative to it has been presented. And so the fact that we didn't get it the first, the second, the third time, you have to keep trying. In Northern Ireland, I chaired 3 separate sets of negotiation. Over a period of 5 years, the main negotiation lasted 2 years. We had 700 days of failure and 1 day of success. And sooner or later, that day is coming in the Middle East. I apologize, I have to run. Thank you all very much.
Just to wrap up, Senator Mitchell, thank you for being here. Judge Weinstein, thank you for being here. Congresswoman Maloney, thanks for being here. And Sybil, to you, what can we say? This is the 9th lecture. I don't know how many here have been to all of them. I've been to all of them, and they just get better. And you get the most wonderful people. We are so lucky to have it. Thank you for coming. Enjoy dessert, and we'll see you a year from now with another great speaker. Thank you very much. There's a book for you, Senator Mitchell's book, and it's outside at the door there, is it? He will sign it, and they arrange to have it signed, right? Yeah, you can have it signed if you want. Okay, thanks so much for coming.